Welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be talking about Billy Napier's decision making with his coaching staff. Now, I wrote an article about this on thehubdigital.com. It's basically a sports blog post. I'm going to put the link in the description box. But I wrote this post, and what I was doing was I was talking about Billy Napier keeping his offensive staff together for the Florida Gators. If you're wondering why Billy Napier and had four of his assistants contracts expiring, or so we thought, supposedly in late January or early, or at least earlier in February, like earlier last week, because it's only the 8th as of right now in February. But it turned out he had extended um, four of his assistants before the month of January was officially over. The two guys you see at the top right here, Darnell Stapleton and Rob Sale, both offensive line coaches. Rob Sale, also the offensive coordinator. Ron Roberts, who was an inside linebackers coach that they hired from Auburn. You have Will Harris, who was the secondaries coach, assistant secondary coach for the Los Angeles Chargers, former secondary coach of the Washington Huskies, and Gerald Chapman, who was the defensive line out of Tulane. Now, he was asked about why, and I forgot to include Joe Houston, the new special teams senior analyst. But Billy Napier was asked about the coaching staff that he parted ways with and kept together. With the defense, he was quoted in saying this, and I'm gonna pull up Twitter, or X as we like to call it, because I had the tweets from Jacob Rudner, who quoted Billy Napier, bookmarked. Just give me a second. It's gotta load up. Got it bookmarked right here. Sorry for the dead air. And boom. Okay, so Jacob Rudner, who covers the Florida Gators, was there for Billy Napier's press conference because the Gators were covering National Signing Day yesterday. Yesterday was National Signing Day, and Billy Napier was asked on what led to so many defensive coaching changes. Napier said, part of the evaluation is that we just needed to play better on that side of the ball. We go through a process to evaluate what we need to do better, and sometimes that's a new voice, a new leader, and a new teacher. And I want you to keep those words in mind. When he was asked about the hiring of Joe Houston as the special teams analyst, who's out of the New England Patriots, he said, Joe Houston is an outstanding coach. We're not only acquiring an expert in special teams, but we're getting a guy who worked with Bill Belichick. And Patriots fans know, while Bill Belichick is not a is really is doesn't really not an expert on offense, when it comes to defense and special teams, he pays a lot of attention to those two sides of the ball. He's been known to spend draft picks, uh, high mid-round draft picks on a kicker and a punter. He did that last year. He's traded draft picks for players to fit on special teams. He's done that quite a bit in his career in New England. And having Joe Houston, who spent time specifically coaching special teams or being an assistant coach, is an improvement over who they had in charge, which was mainly Chris Couch. But I guess you can definitely see that Billy Napier does see some issues with the team and was willing to make changes to do so. And not only did he make these coaching changes, he hired a new nutritionist for the Florida Gators and changed their strength and conditioning program coach as well. So it's not like we can say with Napier, as we did with Dan Mullen, Napier is just too flat out lazy or stubborn to make changes in areas of need. You saw that. You've seen that this past year. Now, one could argue that maybe he's done it 1 year too late instead of doing it after year one. You can make that argument, but at the end of the day, he still made the changes. And it's not that I have an issue with him um, making these changes to the areas that he felt needed to be changed. But my thing is this: if he felt this way about the defensive side of the ball, which makes a lot of sense, that he he felt like changes were going to need to be made. How can he not see the same issue with the two offensive line coaches that are at the top of the screen? I looked up the stats for Florida's in terms of offensive line play and pass production. In terms of running the football, the Gators were 77th in the nation in terms of running the football. Mind you, this is with two good running backs in Trevor Etienne and Montreal Johnson. Now, granted, some could argue that since it was Graham Mertz playing for the Gators instead of Anthony Richardson, they did not have to watch out for the quarterback design runs. And Anthony Richardson, as we saw in against Utah, Texas A&M, and other games, he is capable of taking the game over with his legs. So that also plays a factor into that. They know that Graham Mertz is not that kind of a dual threat quarterback, which is very valid. But Florida's offensive line gave up 39 sacks last year. They averaged 3.25 sacks a game. That was third worst in the SEC last year, behind in front of only South Carolina and Alabama. Now, granted, Alabama is Alabama, and they were still coached by Nick Saban at the time, so they were kind of able to, make up for that in other areas. But the problem is that you're telling me you feel that you needed to make changes at position coaches, at defensive line, linebacker, and secondary. You made changes to the special teams, but you didn't feel the need to see what was wrong with your offensive line. You felt that having these two guys come back would be better. That's the part that's making me scratch my head. How can you feel that you need to make changes on the defensive side of the ball, which was pretty blatant, but you couldn't have the same mindset with the offensive line? Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that, and not only that, but also you still choose to maintain your play calling. So you keep the two offensive line coaches and you keep yourself as the offensive play caller. Now, let's be clear. I don't think Florida's offense was the biggest issue with the 5-7 football team last year. I just addressed all the issues and all the changes that Napier made. So it was just more than just the offense. Because if you look at Florida's defense last year, this is per the NCAA football stats. I got this from the NCAA.org, not from other places, NCAA.org. The Florida Gators were 69th in total defense in FBS. Mind you, there's 130 teams. 69th in FBS, 75th in points allowed per game, 79th in rushing yards allowed per game, 108th in defensive passing efficiency allowed, and they were 70th in passing yards allowed. So obviously, the offense was not Florida's biggest issue, especially when you got down to the final 5 games. 43 points to Georgia, 39 points to Arkansas. Now, I gave them a little bit of slack because in the Arkansas game, I think they just ran out of steam because they were on the field so much when the offense was stagnant during a certain pace of that game. Now, you're going to hear 39 points, and you're going to see that the score Florida lost to Arkansas was 39-36. But you would have to watch the game to understand what I mean by that. When I said the defense ran out of steam because the offense got stagnant, you would have to watch the game in its entirety. Then 52 points to Louisiana State, or LSU for short. Granted, they had Jaden Daniels as the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback and Malik Neighbors, and LSU's offense killed basically almost every defense that they went up against outside of Florida. Florida and others is what I meant to say. Like, the only defense that gave them any sort of fits was Florida State. And that was it. Everybody else, they put up at least 30 points on. So it's not like Florida was the only team to, get shredded by LSU's offense. And then the next game against Missouri, when the offense actually, in my opinion, played better throughout the entirety of the game, they gave up 33 points. And Florida State, 24-14, 24-15, the offense did not do anything throughout the whole game. But the defense's run defense was just bad, especially in the second half. So the defense for Florida has been a problem, and it's been a problem for years. It's been one of the worst defenses in the SEC for the last 4 years since 2020. So that's an issue that should have been addressed a long time ago. But it's just you make the changes, granted, that were needed to be made on defense and special teams, but you somehow think that the offense wasn't the issue. And I think I think it was Billy Napier's pride coming into play, and also the fact that he knows that this is a critical year for him, that if he does not produce some actual respectable results on the field, he's probably going to get fired. He's probably going to get fired. So he's probably thinking, you know what, I'd rather do things my way than to put my faith into somebody else's hands, even if they may be a better expert at offensive insight than myself. I respect that and I appreciate that, but ultimately, that decision you make is going to play a crucial role in what happens in the fall. So Napier's going to have to really knock it out of the park this year, offensively, and it's not just simply stats and points that he needs to work on. The mental errors should not be mental errors need to be almost wiped clean, because you're heading into year 3 of the program. You should not be having guys with the same number jerseys on the same football field for special teams like you did against Utah, or where later on in that game where you had 9 guys on the football field on a kick that Utah missed, and somehow the referees didn't even notice that Florida did not have enough men on the field. So that's something that needs to be corrected. The mental errors, the bad discipline with the penalties, that's something that should go away for Florida. Well, that should go. I mean, penalties are going to happen throughout the game, but better discipline with penalties, less mental errors, better discipline with penalties needs to be seen this year. No excuse. You're a third-year head coach. You got players that have been underneath you for quite some time. You even brought back some veteran players from last year. I read that Florida is returning 70% of his production on offense. So a lot of players, a lot of reps are coming back. So the mental mistakes are even further inexcusable to what they were last year. So it needs to. So for Florida, they need to be the special teams needs to be completely clean, because you're not just bringing in Joe Houston. You're bringing in who's worked at special teams. You're bringing him in from a head coach, Bill Belichick, who prided himself on defense and special teams. And you're bringing in all these position coaches, so there should be a big difference upward in terms of play on the defensive side of the ball. And with these changes that you're making to the nutrition and to the strength and conditioning, there needs to be a major payoff from that investment as well. So that's where I'm going to end it right there. I can understand what Bill Napier is trying to do, and this is all well and good, but if these results don't equal some big wins and some big wins instead of just one big win like you had against Utah, and then you couldn't add to that, and then one big win against Tennessee, and you couldn't build off of that. If you don't have a winning season this year and multiple signature wins as well, well, there's a good chance Florida's going to be looking for a new coach this year. So that's really it. Thanks for listening to the video.